What do you do when the town that wants you dead is the only thing standing between the past you ran from and the future you need to save? It had been 10 years since Elias Cain last saw the town of Havenwood. 10 years since he'd ridden out with a taste of blood and shame in his mouth, the memory of his brother's body still warm in the dust. He'd told himself he'd never return, that the pain of this place would kill him long before any lawman ever could. But the world, it seemed, had a cruel way of calling you back to the places you ran from. He rode in under a dying sun, the long shadows of the mesa casting a purple-gray pallor over the familiar landscape. Havenwood was a ghost of what it once was. The buildings were slumped and peeling, the main street a desolate expanse of packed dirt and tumbleweeds. The old livery was missing a wall, and the saloon's swing doors hung at a crooked, drunken angle. It wasn't the bustling, angry town he'd left behind, but a quiet, weary ruin. Elias dismounted in front of the general store, the worn leather of his saddle creaking softly. The silence was thick and heavy, broken only by the mournful whistle of the wind. He saw a few figures standing in doorways, their faces etched with a familiar mixture of fear and bitterness. They didn't shout his name. They didn't draw their guns. They just watched. He was a ghost to them, a living reminder of a day they'd all tried to forget. He'd never killed an innocent soul in all his years as an outlaw, but he'd been part of a crew that did, and his reputation was inseparable from theirs. Now, that past was a weight he carried with every step, and the townsfolk of Havenwood wore the burden of it just the same. He walked past the old church, its steeple leaning precariously to one side. He could still see the flash of his brother's blood on the weathered wood of the pews, the memory a splinter lodged deep in his soul. He'd been in the mountains when the raid happened, separated from his crew, his brother. By the time he rode in, it was all over. A dozen dead, a town in mourning, and him, a part of it, a branded man. He pushed open the saloon doors and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old whiskey. The bartender, a man named Silas, was a decade older than Elias remembered, his hair now a shock of white. He was polishing a glass with a slow, deliberate rhythm, his eyes on the bottle he was holding. He didn't look up. Elias walked to the bar and laid a silver dollar on the scarred wood. "Whiskey, Silas," he said, his voice a low rasp. Silas finally looked up, his eyes meeting Elias's. There was no hatred in them, only a profound, bottomless exhaustion. "Elias," he said, his voice flat. He didn't reach for the money. "What are you doing here?" Elias didn't answer right away. He just looked around the empty room, at the cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and the empty bottles lining the shelves. "Town looks like it's dying," he said instead. Silas scoffed, a dry, bitter sound. "Dying? It's been dead. The mines gave out 5 years back. The railroad never came through. Now, a man named Corliss has his hooks in everything. He's squeezing us dry, and there's nothing we can do about it." Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The name Corliss was a familiar one, a name whispered in saloons and campfires all across the territory. A ruthless land baron, a man who built his empire on the backs of others. "Corliss," Elias said, the name tasting like ash on his tongue. "What does he want?" "Everything," Silas said, finally taking the silver dollar and pouring a shot of whiskey. "He bought up the bank, the general store. He owns the water rights, the land. He's raising taxes, demanding payment for things we've had for free our whole lives. He's promising us new life, new growth, but all he's doing is burying us under his debts." Elias took the shot glass and swallowed the fiery liquid in one gulp. The burn in his throat was a welcome distraction from the cold dread in his heart. "And the law?" Silas laughed, a humorless, choked sound. "The law? Corliss owns them too. He's got a crew of hired guns, men who ride with him like he's the king of this god-forsaken place. No one dares to stand against him." Elias didn't say anything. He just stared at his reflection in the dark, empty bar, a ghost staring back at him. He knew what he had to do. The town of Havenwood, the place that had branded him, hated him, was in trouble. And he, the man they wanted dead, was the only one who could save it. It was a sick, twisted sort of redemption, a burden he never asked for, but one he couldn't turn away from. He spent the next few days watching, listening. He saw the faces of the people he'd once known, the tailor, the blacksmith, the woman who ran the boarding house. Their eyes were hollow, their shoulders slumped with the weight of despair. He saw the glint of Corliss's hired guns, their silver badges, a mockery of justice. He saw a young boy, no older than his brother had been, trying to sell a half-rotten apple to a man who just scowled and walked away. He knew every inch of this town, every back alley, every secret path. He knew the hidden spring where the water was sweetest, the old logging trail that led to the high pass. He knew the way the wind whispered secrets through the canyons and how the moon cast long, eerie shadows on the dusty streets. One evening he sat on the porch of the old blacksmith's shop, watching the sun set, the sky a bruised palette of orange and purple. The blacksmith, a stoic man named Thomas, sat beside him, his calloused hands resting on his knees. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that existed between men who had known each other for a lifetime. Finally, Thomas spoke. "Why are you here, Elias?" His voice was gruff, devoid of any real emotion. Elias watched a stray dog pick through a pile of refuse in the street. "I don't know," he said truthfully. Thomas scoffed. "Don't lie to me. You're Cain. You don't come back to a place like this for no reason." Elias ran a hand over his face. "There's a debt," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A debt that can't be paid." Thomas didn't press. He just nodded slowly as if he understood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It was a picture of a young woman with a kind smile and a small boy with a shock of red hair. "My wife and son," he said, his voice soft. "They died in the raid. Your brother, he was with them." A cold wave of grief washed over Elias. He hadn't known. His brother, Jesse, had been a good man, a boy who'd been corrupted by the promise of easy money and a false sense of loyalty. He'd never wanted to hurt anyone. Not really. Elias knew that now, in a way he hadn't then. "I'm sorry," Elias said, the words feeling thin and inadequate. Thomas shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. What's done is done. But Corliss, he's different. He's not an outlaw. He's a sickness, a disease that's eating away at what's left of us. He's got men in his pocket, 100 reasons to turn a blind eye. The people here, they want to fight, but they're scared. They've lost too much. They don't have the strength to lose anymore." Elias looked at the town again, at the quiet, desperate faces. He saw the fear, the exhaustion, and he saw a reflection of his own soul. He had lived his life running from a debt he could never repay, a ghost that haunted him every single day. And here, in this dying town, was a chance to finally, truly, put that ghost to rest. The moon was a sliver of bone in the dark sky as Elias stood outside the bank. The building was heavily guarded, 2 men with rifles slung over their shoulders, pacing the porch. Corliss's men. They were nothing special, just common thugs, but they had the weight of Corliss's money and power behind them. He needed to get in, to find the ledger, the one Silas had told him about, the one that detailed every one of Corliss's illegal land claims, every fraudulent tax lien, every crooked deal. It was the only way to expose him, to give the town a chance. Elias slipped into the shadows, a ghost moving through the night. He scaled the back wall of the adjacent building, his movements fluid and silent, the skills of his old life not forgotten. He watched the guards, their rhythm a slow, predictable waltz. When they were on opposite ends of the porch, he dropped down, a dark blur in the night. He made his way to the back window, a small, grimy pane of glass. He pulled a small, worn pick from his pocket, a tool he hadn't used in years. It felt strange in his hands, a reminder of a life he had sworn to forget. He worked the lock, the small clicks a deafening sound in the quiet night. Finally, with a soft thud, the window swung open. He slid inside, the musty smell of old paper and dust filling his nostrils. The room was dark, but a sliver of moonlight cut through the window, illuminating a large wooden desk. He knew the ledger would be there. It always was. A man like Corliss liked to have his secrets close at hand, a sign of his absolute power. He moved with caution, his senses on high alert. He heard a floorboard creak upstairs and froze, his hand on the handle of his pistol. He held his breath, listening. The sound didn't come again. He exhaled slowly, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He found the ledger, a thick, heavy book with a leather cover, on the desk. He flipped through it, the pages filled with Corliss's neat, spidery handwriting. Names, dates, amounts. He saw Thomas's name, Silas's. He saw the names of families who had been here for generations, their land now owned by Corliss. He saw the lies, the half-truths, the outright fraud. This was it. This was the proof. He was about to slip the ledger into his saddlebag when the front door of the bank creaked open. He heard heavy footsteps, the sound of a gun being cocked. "Well, well, well," a voice said, a low, oily sound that made Elias's blood run cold. "Look what the cat dragged in." Elias turned, his hand on his pistol. It was Cole, one of Corliss's lieutenants, a man he'd ridden with in his outlaw days, a man he'd once called a friend. Cole's face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes hard and unforgiving. "Cole," Elias said, his voice flat. "Elias," Cole said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Fancy meeting you here. Last I heard, you were dead. Guess some ghosts just won't stay buried." "I'm not a ghost, Cole," Elias said, his voice low, "and I'm not here to fight." "No," Cole laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You came to steal the old man's ledger. You think you can just waltz in here and take what's his." "It's not his," Elias said, his eyes on Cole's. "It's this town's. He's a thief, a liar, you know that." Cole's smile vanished. "He pays well, Elias. That's all that matters. You gave up on that life. Now you're just a has-been, a man trying to play hero for a town that hates you. They have a right to their land," Elias said, his grip on the ledger tightening. "Rights don't matter out here," Cole said, his hand on the butt of his pistol. "Only power does." A long, tense silence hung between them, the air thick with unspoken history. Elias looked at Cole, at the familiar lines on his face, the scar above his eye, a mark from a bar fight they'd been in years ago. He saw the man he once knew, the boy who'd ridden with him, the one who'd shared his dreams and his fears. He saw the man he had become, a shell of a man, driven by greed and a hollow sort of loyalty. "Let me go, Cole," Elias said, his voice a low plea. "Just let me go." Cole shook his head, his eyes cold and empty. "Can't do that, Elias. The boss would have my head. And besides, quote," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "this town deserves to suffer. They gave us hell, remember? They called us monsters. Now they get to see what real monsters look like." A hot wave of anger washed over Elias, but he pushed it down. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for redemption. He had to show Cole that there was a different way, a better way. "Cole," he said, his voice gentle, "think about what we used to be. We weren't like this. We weren't hurting people who had nothing." Cole scoffed. "We were always like this, Elias. You were just too soft to see it." The words were a bitter pill, but Elias swallowed them. He didn't argue. He knew that arguing was pointless. He knew that the only thing that mattered now was the ledger, the lives of the people in this town, the memory of his brother. Cole raised his pistol, a smirk on his face. "Now, drop the book, Elias, or you'll be a ghost for real." Elias didn't drop the book. He held it close, like a shield. He didn't pull his gun either. He knew that a gunfight would only lead to more death, more pain. He had to find another way, a way that didn't involve violence. He looked at Cole, and a profound sadness washed over him. He saw a man who had lost his way, a man who had sold his soul for a few pieces of silver. And he knew that he couldn't save him. He couldn't save anyone. He could only try. The sun was a searing orb in the sky, beating down on the dust-choked streets of Havenwood. The town had gathered in the square, a silent, tense crowd. Corliss, a portly man with a florid face and a smug smile, stood on a makeshift stage, his hands clasped behind his back. He had the ledger. Cole had taken it from Elias, and in a moment of bitter irony, had returned it to its rightful owner. Elias was bound, his hands tied behind his back, a rope around his neck. He was on his knees, his head bowed, the rope held by a thick-necked brute of a man. The townsfolk watched, their faces a mixture of fear and triumph. The former outlaw, the man who had brought so much pain to their town, was about to be hanged. Justice, they called it. Corliss cleared his throat, the sound a resonant rumble in the quiet square. "People of Havenwood," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "we have captured the man who came to steal your future. This man, Elias Cain, a notorious outlaw, tried to take the very document that will ensure our prosperity. He tried to keep you from your new life." A murmur went through the crowd. Elias looked up, his eyes meeting Silas's. Silas looked away, a flicker of shame in his eyes. Elias saw Thomas, his face a hard mask of indifference. He saw the faces of the people he'd known, the faces of their children, their grandchildren. They didn't see him. They saw the ghost of the man who had wronged them, the man who had stolen their hope. Corliss held up the ledger, the leather cover gleaming in the sun. "This ledger, my friends, holds the keys to your future. It is a testament to the growth we will bring to this town. It is the beginning of a new era. And this man," he said, pointing a pudgy finger at Elias, "would have taken that from you. He would have condemned you to a life of poverty and despair. He is a parasite, a relic of a past we must burn to the ground." Elias didn't speak. He just waited, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had failed. He had come here, a fool on a fool's errand, and now he was going to die. He had tried to do the right thing, to pay a debt that could never be paid, and all he had done was make things worse. Corliss turned to the crowd, his smile widening. "Now what do we do with a man who steals from us? A man who tries to hold us back?" "Hang him!" a voice from the crowd shouted. "Hang him!" The cry was taken up by others. The chant grew, a deafening chorus of hatred and revenge. Elias closed his eyes, the sound a physical weight on his shoulders. He didn't fight. He didn't resist. He just accepted his fate. This was the end. He had tried, but it wasn't enough. Then, a voice cut through the noise, a small, fragile voice that somehow managed to be louder than all the others. "No!" Elias opened his eyes. It was a young boy, maybe 10 years old, standing in the front of the crowd. He had a shock of red hair and a face that was a mirror image of Thomas's. He was the blacksmith's grandson. The boy stood his ground, his small fists clenched. "He's trying to help us," he shouted, his voice a high-pitched cry. "My grandpa told me. He said Mr. Elias was trying to save the town." The crowd fell silent. Everyone looked at the boy, and then at Thomas. The blacksmith's face was a mask of shock and confusion. He hadn't said that. He had only told his grandson that Elias was trying to do something. The boy had filled in the blanks himself, Corliss's face twisted in a sneer. "The boy is lying," he said, his voice flat. "He doesn't know what he's talking about." But the seed had been planted. The crowd looked at Elias, and then back at the boy. They saw the same truth in their eyes. The town was dying. They had seen it with their own eyes. They had lived it. They had nothing left to lose. A woman stepped forward, her face etched with a familiar despair. "He's right," she said, her voice shaking. "My husband told me. He said Elias was trying to get the ledger, the one that proves what Corliss is doing to us." Another person came forward, then another. The quiet murmurs of doubt turned into a chorus of truth. They were tired of the lies. They were tired of the fear. They were tired of living under Corliss's thumb. Corliss's face was red with rage. "This is a conspiracy," he bellowed. "I will have you all arrested. I will take everything from you." But it was too late. The tide had turned. The people of Havenwood, the people who had wanted Elias dead, were now standing up for him. They had lost everything. They had nothing left to lose. Elias watched, a lump forming in his throat. He saw the faces of the people he'd known, the people he'd wronged, and he saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. It wasn't a triumphant, victorious hope, but a quiet, defiant one. A hope born from the ashes of a town on its knees. Corliss, seeing that he was losing control, pulled a pistol from his jacket. He aimed it at the boy. "I will shoot him," he screamed. "I will kill him right here." Elias's head shot up. He lunged forward, his body crashing into the man holding the rope. The man stumbled, and Elias rolled, his hands still bound, his body a blur of motion. The shot rang out, a sharp crack in the air, but it was too late. The bullet went wide, a puff of dust erupting from the ground near the boy's feet. The crowd erupted. They surged forward, a wave of human fury. They didn't have guns. They didn't need them. They were armed with the strength of their anger, their despair, their hope. Corliss, his eyes wide with fear, tried to escape, but he was surrounded. He was pulled from the stage, his screams swallowed by the roar of the crowd. The town had risen. Elias, his hands finally free, stood up, watching the chaos unfold. He didn't join in, he just watched, a quiet observer. He saw Thomas, his face a mixture of pride and relief, embracing his grandson. He saw Silas, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. He saw a town, once dead, now alive again. He turned and walked away. He didn't need their thanks. He didn't need their forgiveness. He had done what he had to do. He had paid his debt. The town of Havenwood, a place that had once been a source of so much pain, was now a place of hope, a place he could finally leave behind. He walked into the sunset, the long shadows of the mesa stretching out before him, a free man, a man who had finally, truly, found redemption. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.